I've been a freelance land surveyor for about 15 years. Most of my work is solo, remote stuff. I'm usually camping out for days at a time in places nobody else is going to. I actually prefer it that way, or at least I used to. This happened about 4 years ago. I'd been hired to survey boundary markers on a parcel up in the mountains near the Clearwater region in Idaho. Remote doesn't even begin to describe it. It was 6 miles of hiking just to reach where I set up camp. I filed my route with the local ranger station like I always do, and I packed a week's worth of supplies. The first day went smooth. I found 3 markers, logged everything, and made it back to camp before dark. The forecast had called for cold and light snow, and that's pretty much what I got. By the second day, though, things started to change. We got way more snow than expected. The next marker was only about a mile out of the way, so instead of calling it right then and there, I figured, what the hell? That was a mistake. I honestly still think about how stupid it was not to just hunker down or make it out of the woods when I had a chance. The terrain was all hidden rocks and icy slopes under fresh snow, so to translate, the worst possible conditions to hike through. I was picking my way down a short embankment when my boot hit a patch of ice I never saw. One wrong step like that and you could die, and I mean that literally. I slid probably 15 feet before catching myself on a tree root. I was lucky not to have slid further, but the pain in my right ankle was instant. I tried to tell myself I was fine, but the moment I stood up, I audibly groaned in pain. I couldn't put much weight on that leg, and I knew it would be a few hours before I'd be able to walk normally. I was so mad at myself, but there was nothing I could do. I abandoned the rest of the work right there. No markers worth getting stranded over. I painfully made my way back uphill to the main trail and started the slow hike back toward camp. But after a few minutes, I noticed boot tracks on the trail, which seemed to have come from further into the woods on my left. They were heading in the same direction I was going, and they looked somewhat fresh, which I could tell by how sharp the edges were despite the fact that it was snowing. I figured it was probably a hunter or maybe someone from the landowner's crew checking on the property. It's not unusual to cross paths with people out there, even in remote areas. I didn't think much of it. I just kept moving, trying to keep as much weight off my ankle as possible. As the light started fading, I began hearing sounds behind me. At first, I chalked it up to normal forest noises, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I kept turning around and looking over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything. That part of the forest was pretty dense though, so if there were any animals stalking me or something, there's a good chance that I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway. I stopped walking and the sound stopped too. Not right away. There was a delay of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but they stopped. I froze up and tried to listen for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing beyond the wind and snow. I started walking again, and this time the footsteps didn't resume, so I thought everything was good. But then a few minutes later, I heard those damn footsteps again. I kept turning around, but I couldn't see anything. It was especially freaky because I knew I wouldn't be able to run if there was a threat out there. That was the worst part. I would have loved to investigate or try to scare off whatever animal was stalking me, but I didn't have the mobility to do so. So I just kept moving. But then I heard something metallic off to my left. I don't really know how to describe it. It was this low sound, like something lightly hitting a fence post or a piece of equipment. It was freaky because there wasn't supposed to be anything but trees out there, so I had no idea what could be making a metallic sound of all things. The sounds must have distracted me, because it dawned on me that I hadn't been keeping track of those footprints I noticed earlier. I looked down and realized they were gone. I turned around frantically, but I couldn't see when they had branched off or if they had turned around or something. I kept looking to my left, trying to see through the trees so I could at least spot whatever had made the sound. My eyes locked onto something, and the alarm bells started going off in my brain. There was another set of footprints coming out of the tree line on my left, running parallel to mine through the snow. They weren't that far away, which was the most concerning part. Whoever had been ahead of me on that trail was now walking alongside me through the trees. At that point, I was so scared that I wasn't thinking straight. I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have just kept going. But instead, I spoke up, asking if anyone was there. I didn't get an answer, and after about 20 seconds of waiting, I knew I had to get out of there. But my stupid ankle was still killing me, so I couldn't move that fast. I wanted to run or at least jog, but I couldn't. I was pretty close to camp though, so I just told myself if I kept moving, I'd be fine. I wasn't hearing footsteps behind me anymore, which was good, but I knew there was someone out there, someone who had been ahead of me at one point, which did make sense. I was really close to my sight when I heard the sound of a heavy branch snapping from somewhere behind me. It obviously wasn't a natural sound, or I wouldn't bother mentioning it. I didn't stop moving. I kept thinking about how if I just made it back, I'd be good. And eventually, I did reach my campsite. It was fully dark at that point, and only after getting inside my tent did I realize I wasn't any safer in there than I had been hobbling through the woods. I started packing immediately. My stupid foot made it so hard to move quickly, but I tried my best to rush. I'd say maybe 60% of how scared I was due to the fact that in a fight or a chase, I would be completely screwed without the ability to move properly. Before I finished packing, I heard the thing that I had been dreading the whole time, footsteps right outside the tent. I was so unbelievably scared at that point, and I started thinking about all the options. The footsteps weren't approaching my tent, but rather circling it. There was nothing I could do but wait for them to charge my tent. The sounds of them circling went on for what felt like 5 minutes before everything went quiet. I hadn't heard whoever was out there walk away, but I didn't care. I was leaving, person or not. I finished packing and took a really deep breath before unzipping my tent and stepping out into the snow. The moment I got outside, I looked into the trees and screamed. There was a guy standing in the tree line staring at me. He was really old and sickly, almost like he was dying. He looked disgusting. I stared back at him. I was fully expecting him to charge me, but he didn't. I put my hands up and said, "I don't want no trouble," and he didn't respond. I didn't know what to do. The staring contest lasted a few minutes before he said something I still think about. He said, "You're a lucky man," then turned and disappeared into the woods. The rest of that night is pretty blurry, partly because I was still in so much pain, and partly because of the encounter. If that guy wanted to fight me or kill me, he probably could have. With my ankle all messed up, there would have been nothing I could have done. I finished packing and left, not even caring about it being dark. When I eventually got checked out, I was told I had severely sprained my ankle, and it was a miracle I hadn't messed it up worse by walking. I ended up reporting that freak in the woods, but I know nothing was going to come of it. I didn't take another winter contract for almost a year. I still do remote work, it's my livelihood and I'm good at it, but I don't camp alone on winter assignments anymore. I either bring someone with me, or I turn the job down. This is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I've lived in Alaska most of my life. My family moved to Fairbanks when I was 6, and I never really left. I spent my summers working fish camps as a teenager, started guiding professionally in my early 20s, and that's basically been my life ever since. I'm 29 now. I work seasonally as a wilderness guide in northern Alaska, and I've been doing it long enough that I don't really get rattled much out there. I don't get lost, or I guess I should say I didn't think I could get lost, because what happened 3 years ago kind of forced me to reconsider that. My boyfriend at the time was Randy. He grew up in rural British Columbia and was basically the male version of me when it came to the outdoors. Actually, that's not really fair to him because he was probably more experienced than me in certain areas, like winter navigation specifically. We'd been together about 4 years, and most of our relationship revolved around trips that would make normal couples absolutely miserable. Week-long hunts and backcountry camping where you actually have to plan or you'll die. That sounds dramatic, but it's literally true up here. The plan was to snowmobile between 2 state-registered cabins about 60 miles apart. We'd spend a night at each and be back home in 4 days. We'd done the exact trip twice before, and it was always fine. The weather forecast looked good when we left, so we weren't worried at all. The first day was completely uneventful. We got to the second cabin by late afternoon, ate these freeze-dried meals that Randy swore tasted good but were honestly terrible, and then we played cards. It was a pretty relaxing evening. The next morning, I woke up and realized there was a genuine storm going on outside. It was basically a full-on blizzard that came out of nowhere, which was super surprising given the fact that there had been nothing indicating precipitation in the weather forecast. Randy and I decided to brave the storm, despite the fact that we had plenty of food and could have totally waited another day. We should have waited another day. I know that now. Things went south really quickly. The wind was almost worse than the snow. It was really hard to see much of anything, so Randy opted to take the lead. I was just following the path of his snowmobile, which was admittedly a lot easier than navigating the terrain in low visibility without anything in front of me, which is why I don't blame him for what happened. I don't really know how it happened, but 1 second Randy was just plodding along, and the next, his snowmobile was on top of him. I jumped off mine and ran over to him, but it was too late. His leg was bent in a way legs should not bend. Keep in mind, this was a guy who had once finished a 2-day trek on a sprained ankle and didn't even mention it until we were back at the truck. The first thing I tried was getting him on my snowmobile. That was the obvious move. Just get him on the back and ride us both to the cabin. But Randy's 6'2" and probably 220 at the time, and those aren't like ATVs where you can just throw someone on the back and go. An Arctic cat in deep snow is already a lot of machine to handle by yourself. I got him up once, kind of half dragged him onto the seat behind me, and he lasted maybe 10 seconds before he slid off the side. The sound he made when he hit the ground is something I never want to hear again. I tried one more time, and it was worse. He couldn't grip with his legs at all, and every time the machine shifted even slightly, he'd start to go, and there was nothing I could do to hold him and steer at the same time. After the second attempt, he told me to stop, and the way he said it, he wasn't asking, he was telling me. That's when we both kind of accepted what the actual plan was going to have to be. I pulled out the satellite phone, and my hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I actually managed to get a connection after a few tries, but I wasn't sure if my message about our coordinates and where we were got through. Relying on someone else to come save Randy was a terrible idea, and we both knew it. I knew what had to happen. I'd leave him sheltered with everything we had, then take my snowmobile and push for the nearest cabin to use the emergency radio. There wasn't really a discussion about it. Randy just looked at me, and I looked at him, and that was it. I got him set up with every extra layer we had and marked our coordinates on my GPS. He told me to be careful, and then he told me not to do anything stupid, and then I just left him there in the snow. I was navigating mostly by feel and GPS, but the circumstances seemed so dire that I was having trouble not freaking out. After about 45 minutes, things started feeling off. Like landmarks weren't matching up and the terrain didn't look right. I kept telling myself it was the snow messing with my perception, but the feeling just got worse and worse, and then I saw smoke through the trees to my left. I angled toward it, thinking I somehow looped back to one of the cabins, but the structure didn't match either one. It was smaller and kind of ugly, honestly, with one side almost buried in a snowdrift. There was a faint glow from inside, and the smoke was coming from the chimney. At that point, I just realized smoke meant a person, and a person meant a radio, or at least a way to warm up enough to keep going. I killed the engine and trudged through the snow over to the door. I knocked a few times, expecting someone to come over and open the door, but no one did. So I tried the door handle and realized it was unlocked. I walked in and was kind of surprised to discover that it was really warm in there. It was definitely inhabited. There was a wood stove in the corner with a fire going and a bedroll on the floor. There was also a can of some kind of food on the floor with a spoon still in it. It honestly looked like whoever was living in there had walked out the door 5 minutes before I came in. I announced my presence, but no one answered, so I just stood there warming my hands and trying the satellite phone again. But I had no luck, which was pretty disheartening. Still though, I didn't want to go back into those treacherous conditions yet, but I had to. Randy's life was depending on it. As I was turning to leave, I noticed something sitting on the shelf on the back wall. I walked over to it and realized it was a pair of binoculars, along with a folded map and a notebook. I unfolded the map and realized it was a trail map of the area we'd been riding through. Sections of it were circled in marker, and I recognized some of them. 2 of them specifically. Both of the cabins we'd been staying at were circled, and there were dates written next to them in pencil. Some were from that winter, some were from the winter before that, and so on. I picked up the notebook and realized whoever it belonged to had been documenting people. There were descriptions of people, like what they were wearing, what direction they were headed, that sort of thing. I was instantly really unsettled. There was a good chance Randy and I were somewhere in that notebook, but I wasn't sticking around to check. I don't really know how to tell you what it felt like. It wasn't fear right away. It was more like every single thing in the cabin just sort of rearranged itself in my head. It didn't feel like a safe place anymore. I put everything down and went straight to the door, but before I could reach the door handle, I heard the loudest and scariest scream I've ever heard. It came from below me, under the floor. It was a woman, and they weren't saying anything, just screaming at the top of their lungs like they were getting stabbed. The shock made me literally jump, and I just ran for the door. I started my snowmobile as fast as I could and rode out of there without even looking back. I never got another glimpse of the cabin. I was a total mess after that, to the point where I don't really remember the rest of the journey. At some point, I made it to the real cabin and got through on the emergency radio. They had to dispatch a helicopter just to make it to Randy, and he was near death. Hypothermic for one, and his leg was in terrible shape, but he was alive and conscious. It was the worst few hours of my life, to the point where I have trouble even piecing together the sequence of events. Randy survived, but the experience was so traumatic that he swore off winter navigation forever, or at least as long as we were still together. I told as many people as I could about that cabin and that scream, and I was told they'd send someone out there as soon as the conditions were safe to do so, and you best believe I followed up on that. After a few days, they eventually told me they'd sent a small team out there, but they weren't able to find a structure matching my description and location. The guy I was speaking with actually had the audacity to suggest that I hallucinated the whole thing, and I flipped out on him. That was basically the end of the conversation. Randy and I broke up about a year after the incident, and it had nothing to do with any of this, but I still think about this all the time. There are really only 3 ways to explain what happened that day, and none of them are good. The first is that none of it was real, that I really did hallucinate everything, from the cabin right down to the scream. I was terrified and half frozen, and I just left my boyfriend to potentially die in the snow, and my brain constructed a detailed 10-minute experience inside a building that didn't exist. I can't fully rule that out. The second is that it was real, and that person screaming was someone who needed help, someone who I just left there, probably to die. The troopers either couldn't find the place or didn't try hard enough, and whoever was under those floorboards, I don't even know what could have happened to them. The only other explanation is that it was some kind of trap. Maybe the smoke and the light were supposed to draw someone in, and whoever wrote those notebook entries had been tracking people through that area for a while, looking to kidnap someone or God knows what else, and I had walked directly into it, or worse, maybe that trap had actually worked. That scream, maybe that was someone unlucky enough to walk into that cabin sometime before me, and if I had gotten there a little earlier, it would have been me under those floorboards. I'm not sure what to make of any of this.